Welcome to this 6th tutorial on Android Runner and its tools. In the last video I talked about how to set up your Android device and local development environment in preparation for using the framework to run experiments. In this video I'll discuss running an experiment using the Batterystats profiler. I'll discuss some common pitfalls with running experiments, some general debugging recommendations. I'll also discuss the output files that the experiment generates. And we'll also briefly touch on the progress module, which is an important tool of the framework that lets you restart your experiment in case an error gets thrown midway through the experiment. It helps save you a lot of time, potentially. And I'll also guide you through my thought process as I set up the configuration file before running the experiment with the Batterystats profiler. And the output from this experiment will be saved in a public GitHub repository, and the data you'll be using with the other TA to graph and perform statistical analysis on. And in that repository I'll also include examples of the systrace and logcat files that get produced by the profiler, but normally they get deleted shortly thereafter after the profiler is finished using them to perform calculations on energy consumption. And that's for good reason too, because they're pretty large files, but it might be helpful for you to see them. Alright, so let's get started with configuring an experiment using the Batterystats profiler. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the README webpage in the frameworks repository for the Batterystats plugin, and just make sure that I have all the dependencies installed and confirm that my phone has the right kind of capabilities to use the Batterystats profiler. So let's walk down this list here. So I mentioned in a previous video that you need to install Python 2 to use the Batterystats profiler. This is because systrace.py will only run with Python 2. So I would recommend downloading and installing Python 2.7. And in video 4 I talked about how to retrieve your device's powerprofile.xml file. You'll need to use the APK tool to decode this file because it's going to be retrieved in a binary format. So the APK tool will translate that into an XML file that will be readable, and so you'll need that. And basically what the power profile is a breakdown of the different components on your Android device and the current consumption per unit of time for each of those components. So this framework, this profiler uses that file to help make its calculations. And then if you're an Ubuntu user, you can download systrace using these two commands here on the terminal. And then it says here we need a device that is able to report on the idle and frequency states of the CPU. So first let's connect our device to ADB, and I've already done that. So ADB devices, as you can see, my LGG6 is connected. So I'm already in the systrace directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to confirm that my phone is capable of using this profiler. So I'm going to write in Python 2 systrace.py-l. So they're talking about the idle and frequency states of the CPU. Well, my phone can do both, so we're good to go. Alright, moving on. Let's go look at the example configuration. For Batterystats. So it comes with a config_web.json and a config.json example configurations. I've already made the determination that I want to profile 3 APKs. So because of that, it's going to be a native experiment. And the devices, okay, so we're going to need to change this. So if you recall, I said my device is already connected to ADB, so we need to make sure that our device's device ID is in devices.json. Alright, so it already is here because I've used this phone before in the past. So if you don't see yours here, which you probably won't, especially if it's your first time using your device, then you'll need to paste that ID here and then have some name in it over here as the key, and then whatever you use here you'll need to place into here. So I'm just gonna replace that with the LGG6. Repetitions, for my own thesis I use 30, but for this case I'm just gonna say 10. Duration, I'm gonna leave that at 1 minute. Monkey runner path, so these are going to be APKs. I already know what they do, and there's not going to be any user interaction needed, so we don't need the monkey runner path. Systrace, okay, so this is just going to be, it's going to be different for your machine, obviously. And because I've already run this experiment, I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I'm going to make sure okay. So we now have the correct systrace path, the correct power profile path for my LGG6. One thing I forgot to do here is, if we're going to run a decent experiment, now we're not amateurs or anything like that, so we want to make sure that this is set to true for randomizing the experiment. Alright, and then because we're talking about APK files, we're going to have to populate the paths variable here with some APK files. So these are just this is just like a file path to these 3 APK files. Okay. And now we have the profiler section here. It's already, the battery stats cleanup is true. Again, you typically want cleanup to be true just because the systrace files alone are like 22 megabytes. So, and that's for one run only. So yeah, it gets large really fast. So, and if we wanted to, we can add this in there, but we don't necessarily need to because the profiler has some defaults in place, so we don't need to do anything unless, of course, you have a particular path you need to use for Python 2. So let's go back. Scripts. There's no custom script for this. We're just going to be running the application, but I'll leave this in. We'll make this go down from 2 minutes to 1 minute. Alright. So I'll save that. I'll go back. Clear. So now let's start up the Python virtual environment. So I'm going to go to where that virtual environment is and type in alright, so now I'm in the Python virtual environment where all the Android runner dependencies are located. So now I'm going to go into the Android runner directory here. Now it's not the main directory. The main directory is actually here, where you can see all the Android runner directory, the examples. So go one outside of that. Now what you want to do is type in Python 3 Android-runner and then the file path. In this case it's going to be examples, batterystats, config.json. Now let me make sure. Yep. All right. Before we execute this, and just in general, before you execute any experiment, especially if it's going to be a long experiment, make sure you double or triple check that no applications are running in the background on the Android device, and make sure all unnecessary services and settings are turned off or disabled. And the screen should be, the brightness should be set to the minimum. And so I would recommend reviewing the last video if you need a refresher on preparing the Android device. So, alright, so let's start it. Okay, we screwed up somewhere here, and this is the good thing about the error handling, especially with the configuration file. So here there's nothing after cleanup, so we don't need a comma there. I think that's where the issue was. Fortunately, it's not like it's going to run through a lot of the experiment and then throw an error if you forgot to remove a dangling comma somewhere, so it'll tell you right away. Alright, so let's try again. Alright. So it's decided to run this particular APK. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to install it on my Android device, and then it's going to run it and profile it. But I don't want to waste too much of your time with this, so what I'm going to do is stop it prematurely. Alright, and what I want to point out is this section down here. So see this dash dash progress? So every time you run an experiment, that experiment will create a progress.xml tree, which is basically like the framework's roadmap of how exactly the experiment is going to be run. So it knows before the experiment starts how exactly it's going to be run, such as when a particular application is going to be run, when the next one is going to be run, is it going to be randomized, is this profiler next or is that profiler next, that sort of thing. So if we ran into an error and we want to restart where we left off, all we need to do is grab the previous command and then paste in this progress field here, and as you can see, it will restart. So I'm going to stop it right now just because I don't want to waste too much time. Alright. Alright, so we've already seen that if there's an issue with the configuration file in terms of, maybe you forgot a bracket or you forgot to remove a comma, the error will get thrown right away, so that's nice. And typically it's just that you forgot to remove a comma or you forgot to add a comma. Alright, so we're going to move on. Alright, so sometimes you'll run into problems either within Android Runner, or if you're going to make any kind of custom scripts to use for your experiment. And if you're not familiar with the Python debugger, I recommend it, especially for some of the more funky issues that you come across that print statements might be a little bit too clunky to expedite solving. So you just import PDB, you call this function wherever you think it's relevant to call it, and then some of the commands that I like to use are included here. And the other thing that I haven't yet talked about is using the experiment log, which is something that every experiment will produce, which is just detailed documentation of the whole experiment. And you can share this file with other people on your team to help you debug a certain problem. So let's look at the output that the framework will generate for this. I think it's, yeah, let's just look at this one here. So it produces this one file with a timestamp. It has aggregated results here. I believe for Batterystats, this is the mean for each one of these APKs. It produces a copy of the configuration file that you use for the experiment here. Now, okay, this is not the exact one, so I'm looking at a different one. This should say 10, so this is not the exact same experiment that I've already run that had 10 repetitions, but anyways, it shouldn't matter. So like I was saying, it produces a copy of the configuration file that you used. It produces this experiment log, which is just as the experiment progresses, this log gets populated, and it has everything in it that you can imagine. It has all the ADB commands that get sent to the device, anything that gets returned from the device in terms of, you know, its Android version, API number, all the packages installed on the device. And it's going to look pretty similar for every application that gets run, at least as it relates to a particular profiler, I should say. And any kind of errors that get raised will also be included. So I would definitely just take a look at the experiment log just to make sure you understand what kind of information is in it, but it's pretty useful. And then I was saying here, the progress tree is here, and this is going to be useful for when you have to restart the experiment. And there's also some other information that gets aggregated here. So it's split up by the 3 different APKs, and these are the individual files that get created and then get aggregated later in this aggregated file down here. The thing to note about the Batterystats profiler, the results, there's going to be 2 different results. So we have the Joule results, and this is calculated using the dumpsys Batterystats utility, only that, and it's current times voltage to get the joules here. The results file, this uses the systrace, and so it uses systrace to grab the CPU information, and also uses Batterystats for the components and breaks it down by component basically and calculates the energy consumption. And the joules from this file are not going to match the Joule results here in this file because they're 2 different calculations. And the calculation used for this, you can read more about it in the Batterystats README here. There's an academic paper on Petra. So let's see what else. Alright, so I think that concludes this video, and that also concludes the main 6-part Android Runner tutorial series for Freie Universität's Green Lab Graduate Computer Science course. Best of luck with the course.